Hi everyone, and welcome to Priority Zero, a LeadDev engineering leadership podcast. My name's Scott Carey, and I'm your host today, and I am joined by Nick Means. Nick is a VP of engineering at MedScout. He's based in Austin, Texas, and for anyone that doesn't know him, he does these fantastic conference talks, especially here at LeadDev, where we're recording today down in the pit theater of the Barbican. He did his talk yesterday, all about the history of the Barbican estate. Nick, welcome. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Excited to be here.
For anyone who hasn't had a chance to catch your talk yet, which is probably most people, can you just give us a little snippet of why you chose to do a conference talk about the Barbican estate?
Yeah, I think it's an underappreciated piece of architecture. It's not as famous as it probably should be, given the pedigree of Chamberlain, Powell, and Bond, who built it, and the number of grade-listed buildings that they built around the UK. I think people look at it and it's concrete, so they lump it in with all of the other brutalist architecture. And it's not. It's much more organic than most of what you would call brutalist. It's brutalist really only because it's built out of concrete. Love that.
Right, so yeah, if you want to see the rest of that talk, it's going to be on our YouTube channel, hopefully alongside this episode. But we're not here to talk about the Barbican, although I know you would love to. We're here to talk about you and your Priority Zero. So Nick, tell us a little bit about just how you got into the field of engineering. When did you kind of get that spark for software and working with software?
I was fortunate to get the spark very, very early. Part of the Oregon Trail generation, so kind of the group of people that grew up pre-internet and got the internet probably middle school, high school.
Can you explain that for people who don't know what the Oregon Trail was?
Yeah, the Oregon Trail is a classic game that was on the Apple II. So classic green screen game where you were making your way from the east coast of the United States to Oregon, and you had to make decisions along the way, and almost everybody died of dysentery. That was the ending that was most common in the game. But it's probably the first video game proper that I ever played. Ostensibly educational.
So that kind of got you interested in computers.
I had an uncle that was in computers, actually, and he pushed my mother very hard to get me into that field, to give me some exposure to it. And I ended up doing a computer camp when I was in fourth grade, before such things were common. All MS-DOS based, logo programming, basic programming. I just kind of fell in love with it from there.
And how did you take to it? Because I think that, starting with basic is basically an experience of banging your head against the wall over and over again. And that's not for everyone. How did you take to that?
It's not, but this is in the days before Python, before Ruby, before more expressive languages. So compared to something like learning C, basic's quite easy. And I've always been a bit of a systems-oriented thinker.
Is that because it's structured?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so thinking in terms of systems, being able to write, okay, go to, and bouncing around line number to line number didn't feel that hard to me because I didn't know anything else. It would feel hard today.
And at what point did it switch from being something that you were kind of doing at computer camp or kind of maybe doing in your spare time to being something that you might think about professionally?
That's a good question. It sort of happened gradually for me. I graduated from college in the middle of the dot-com bust in 2003. And so at that point, my only real career option was 5-day on-the-road consulting, and I didn't want to do that. And so I just actually kept working as a pharmacy tech for a while and kept doing computer stuff as a hobby, and stumbled into a gig where I ended up building an e-commerce presence for a retailer that was based out in the middle of nowhere in West Texas. And that's when it actually became a career for me.
Nice. And then how did your career develop from there? Because you're now in a VP of engineering role. It feels like you've kind of mostly been in the startup space, but how did it go from there?
Yeah, so I did that for 7 years and was everything technology at that company. So warehouse systems, phone systems, built the website, did all the things. The economy started to go south, and they sold motorcycle apparel, and that's one of the things that people don't spend money on when the economy is bad. And so I had been going to the Lone Star Ruby conference in Austin for a couple of years, had a few friends down in Austin, and found a remote job down there. And that was my first tech industry job.
Yeah.
And then was fortunate enough to make some good decisions along the way to get into some good positions from that spot. Had some leaders that really invested in me and invested in my growth.
And have you ever kind of worked at a larger company? Has it always been the smaller size?
GitHub is the biggest place I've worked.
Yes.
So I spent nearly 3 years at GitHub.
And how was that kind of culturally for someone who maybe hadn't worked in a bigger environment?
It was definitely interesting dealing with the amount of bureaucracy that you see in a larger organization.
Were you there pre-acquisition?
I joined at a really interesting time. I joined post-announcement pre-close.
Okay.
So got to see the entire process kind of take place. And I knew that's what I was signing up for. It was a really interesting time, and I sort of did it for the learning.
Yeah, and Microsoft never felt like a bad custodian for that, so probably wouldn't put people off.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the bureaucracy though. So I think it's really interesting for people that spend a lot of their career in startups. And as you said, you were doing all the things, which it sounds like you kind of enjoyed. It was like building the website, but also working on back end, doing some database stuff, figuring all of that out.
Yep.
You don't often get the opportunity to do all of that in a larger organization. How did you adapt to that?
I mean, it's interesting. It's a choice between breadth and depth, right? So when you're working in a larger organization, you have the luxury of going deeper on a topic. So I was working in advanced security at GitHub. I got to lead the integration of the Dependabot acquisition and then the Semel acquisition. So I got very good at developer security tooling. I got really deep into that space. Not a thing I would have had the luxury to do elsewhere, and it certainly informed the way that I've worked at startups since. Some of the security postures that I've installed as a leader at smaller companies.
Yeah. And at what point did security kind of pique your interest?
It didn't, actually. When I was coming into GitHub, I had a couple of different options of which direction to go. And the hiring manager that brought me in said, I really think you would be good for this team. Here's why, and sort of laid the case out for me. I'd never done security before. But I was interested in what he was talking about and what GitHub was trying to do in that area. And I met some of the team and really liked them as well. And it seemed like a good fit. So I went for it.
It's not a switch of domain I see often. Often it's seen as quite a big leap, I think, for most engineers. Did you see it that way? Did you find it that way?
So security tooling is different than security. It's just building software in a specific direction versus going into actual AppSec or something. It was a vertical switch more than a domain switch.
Okay. And then where did you go from there? So actually my question is when you were at GitHub, were you still an individual contributor or had you started getting into management?
I had been a manager for a while at that point.
Yeah, and let's backtrack to when you decided to be a manager. What was that decision like for you?
So I had worked in a company that had sort of a typical programmer culture. Loudest voice in the room was the one that was going to win the argument every time. And around that time, I ran across the famous Brené Brown video about the power of vulnerability, and sort of started applying those ideas to software engineering and knew that there had to be a better way to build and lead software teams than what I had experienced. And it wasn't something that I was seeing out in the market. So I figured that if I was going to try it, I was going to have to get in a leadership position in order to do it. So I sort of set out to do that. Yeah,
so really you wanted to be that change. And that's probably what attracted you to LeadDev at the time, because
absolutely, yeah.
We were kind of there at that time when that shift in management culture was really happening. Is that what you were seeing?
100%. Yeah, that is what attracted me to LeadDev the first time. I remember in 2016, was that the first LeadDev?
We are celebrating our 10-year anniversary next year, so
2015. Yeah, I remember seeing the 2015 conference and being sad that it was in the UK because I couldn't justify the expense of going. And so I decided to put a talk in the next year. And that's when I did the plane crash talk in 2017. Nice. Or 16.
Yeah. And so now you've gone, so you came through GitHub and then you kind of got back into the startup world. And now you are VP of Engineering at MedScout. Just bring us all the way up to the present day.
So coming out of GitHub, I did another developer tools startup called SIM, where we were doing access and approval workflows for engineering teams. Unfortunately, never found enough product market fit to get subsequent investment. I mean, fairly common story in 2024, unfortunately. And so stayed with that company all the way through the wind down. Did that on purpose because I wanted the learning of going through that process. I wanted to see what it was like. It's tough, but I'm glad I made that decision. I'm glad for the learning that I got out of that.
Yeah, I'm guessing it wasn't fun.
No, certainly wasn't. But great team that stayed with us all the way to the end. Tried to find a good acquisition. Couldn't have done that if the team had left. And were able to be transparent with the team the whole time, and they chose to stay anyway. So very gratifying to go through that part of the experience.
And then were you tempted to take a bit of a break because you were in a new role quite quickly after that?
I took a month off between. It would have been nice to take more than that, but MedScout found me and were sort of eager to get me in seat. So I took as much time as I felt like I could get away with taking. I would have loved to have more. I probably could have benefited from more. But at the same time, going from sort of the negative stress of winding a company down to the positive stress of taking on a new role in a growing company, that's probably a better cure for the sort of exhaustion and burnout I was getting into at the end of sim anyway.
Yeah. What'd you do in your month off?
Honestly, prepared for the talk I did yesterday.
Read a lot about
did
the
a
Barbican.
lot of reading about the Barbican. I recorded a couple of episodes for a podcast that I haven't launched yet. What else did I get up to? A few other things.
Nice. And so, yeah, you kind of quickly decided to join MedScout. What was it about that company that attracted you to the role?
The CEO is very culture focused. Obviously, I'm a big culture focused person. That's the thing that I like to do, is to build engineering cultures, high agency, high autonomy. So I learned several years ago that the way to find companies like that for me is just to wear my heart on my sleeve in the interview process. So I'm very clear about who I am, what my leadership approach is, what I bring to the table when I'm interviewing for a new role. And the company I'm interviewing with is either going to opt in for that or they're not. And the thing I saw in MedScout was a company that was growing, was in good shape, an investable business in 2024, and a business that wanted to build on culture, wanted to build an engineering team that was highly autonomous, had a lot of agency, understood customer problems, and worked to solve them.
Yeah, nice. And you came in at the VP level. We all know that the VP role can really vary in shape and size. Like, what does your VP role look like there?
I'm the only engineering leader right now. So it's VP things, it's CTO things, it's line manager things. All of it's mine right now until we grow the company a little bit, and we'll bring in managers at some point.
And what's your biggest challenge in that role at the moment?
Biggest challenge right now is probably something you've heard in several other episodes. It's trying to figure out the AI play, but more specifically, trying to figure out how to get the talent to execute the AI play. You know, we're a seed stage startup right now, don't have a lot of cash to burn. AI engineers are very expensive because everybody wants them right now. And so trying to figure out how to build that capability and that talent in-house versus having to go out and hire it.
Cool. And I saw, this is definitely not your personality type at all, but I did see you weighing in on X, formerly known as Twitter, the other day, where someone was talking about how they think that one-to-ones are pointless. And I saw that you couldn't help yourself but kind of really strongly rebuke that opinion. I'd love to just hear why you think one-to-ones are such an important tool for managers.
If I didn't do anything else in my job and only did one-on-ones, if that's all I was allowed to do, I could still lead an engineering team. I wouldn't have to show up to any of the meetings. I really think it's the engineering leader's most important touch point, but it's because I'm a very coaching-focused leader. So when I'm in a meeting, I'm intentionally trying to pull my voice back to create space for the other people in the room and to develop the other leaders in the company. And so a lot of how that process works is spending the time in one-on-ones, coaching somebody up, getting them to take more of a stance and to speak up more in meetings, to be more forthcoming with the things that they think and that they want to build. I don't know, unless you're in an organization that's very directive, where you have a leader that's just telling everybody what to do on a regular basis, how you could lead without one-on-ones.
Yeah, why do you think that opinion, it might not be a common opinion, but why do you think that opinion exists, that you could manage without one-to-ones?
I think it is because there are organizations out there that are highly directive, and there's engineers that like to work that way. There's very much engineers that would prefer just to take a backlog of issues and burn them down and not have to think about product decisions or any of that. They just want to write the code. That's not who I tend to hire. It's not who I tend to want to work with. I want engineers that have product knowledge, that do product thinking and want to engage in that side of product development.
What else do you look for in the hiring process? What are your kind of...
A lot of it's collaboration. I tend to be a little contrarian in that I don't do a lot of technical screening in my engineering interviews. I'm not a big believer in lead code. Don't think most software that engineers write actually is that style of software. I can't think of a time recently where somebody's had to pull algorithmic knowledge out of their back pocket and write something, because most of that's built into the framework at the scale that the products that most of us are building operate. So the technical screen is more of a due diligence process for me. Do they actually have the experience they say they have on their resume? Great. Now let's figure out if they're actually a fit for the team, if they've got grit, if they've got an internal locus of control, if they're a very driven person, because that's what it takes to survive in a startup environment. You kind of have to come in and be able to chart your own course, because you're not always going to get the amount of guidance that you would want.
Yeah, like we've had other kind of guests talking about like looking for curiosity, especially in startup environments, like wanting to uncover different parts of the business and not wanting to be too kind of siloed.
Yeah.
Again, a good quality to look for in interviewing.
Absolutely.
You've mentioned autonomy a couple of times, and I think people always kind of value autonomy, but how do you kind of spot it, and how do you foster an environment where autonomy is important?
Spotting it for me is behavioral interviewing. Tell me stories of your career. Tell me a time when you saw something that needed to be done, wasn't getting done, and you just did it. You took care of it. Lots of questions like that. Doesn't always mean that someone's going to come in and be able to exercise autonomy in the environment that you're in, but it's about the best way to screen for it that I've seen. And then how do you build an environment that supports it? I think there's a lot of things to that. You have to build a learning culture so that there's really no such thing as failure. It's just an opportunity to learn. And with that, you sort of have to have the guardrails so that the splash zone of failure is small, so that you can afford the failures that somebody that's learning to operate with your customers can sometimes get into. And then I think you have to spend a lot of time setting context, helping them understand the customers, helping them understand the customers' problems. I love to do storytelling on stage, but I also do it a lot at work, because I think it's a pretty crucial skill if you want an autonomous engineering team. They need to know the story of what the customer is struggling with and the story of where the company wants to go.
Do you have a framework for doing that people might be able to kind of learn from?
It's something that I've thought about sitting down and figuring out for a long time. I don't. Storytelling is such a native skill for me that I've not really taken the time to deconstruct it and figure out where it came from.
Yeah, I mean, there are, plenty of very good books out there about the history of storytelling. But yeah, I think it's in very, we're not going to sit here and deconstruct it now, but in very simple terms, there's always a beginning, a middle, and the end. But I think that we've been seeing a kind of real increase in interest from a lot of our community in how you communicate things outside of engineering. And I think having a storytelling framework or thinking about things in that frame is a really useful way of doing that.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of the job easier to be able to tell those stories. The one thing I would add to beginning, middle, end is conflict.
Yeah.
Because there has to be a conflict in a story or it's just not interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the famous framework, but it's conflict and the journey of resolution, isn't it? And so who's the best manager you've ever had in your career?
The best manager I've had in my career was probably the director of engineering that I worked under at GitHub. Because he gave me a ton of autonomy, a ton of trust. I was always close by in case something went wrong or went sideways, but gave me the trust to go and run these integrations on these two big acquisitions, which is still, looking back, surprising that I got that amount of trust and I was able to do those two projects. Stretched me in ways that I didn't know I could stretch, and let me do some things that I didn't know that I was able to do, just by basically saying, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? Go do it. And that's influenced a lot of my leadership as well. The idea of just a lot of what you have to do to grow leaders under you is just give them space.
Yeah, and I think identifying those opportunities and kind of giving people that nudge. We were talking to someone the other day who does these kind of bi-weekly showcases of things that people have done. And the question I had was do the same people keep showing up for those showcases? And they were like, no, actually, we've been really pleased with how many different people are doing it. And that comes down to the line managers being great at kind of putting their people up there. Is that something that you kind of take with your company and your role?
Not yet. Still a little early for that. But definitely the things that I'm looking for is to be able to spread the leadership opportunities out. I want everybody in the company leading projects on a regular basis, because everybody needs those skills. Everybody needs to be able to guide a project. It's the Andy Grove's idea of task relevant maturity pops up in my discussions a lot. So how big a project is this person ready to lead? Okay, let's give them a small project. Let's see how they do with it. Let's see what they learn. Let's see what they can learn, and then give them bigger and bigger opportunities to lead and to take things.
Great. And Nick, this is the Priority Zero podcast. So I'd want to know, what's that Priority Zero for you right now? You're quite new in a role. What's that thing that's kind of right at the top of your list?
I mean, there's so many things, because you step into a new role in a startup, you're wearing a bunch of hats. I'm working through SOC 2 right now. I'm doing some hiring right now. I installed an applicant tracking system because we didn't have one when I came. There's a lot of things like that. But the thing that's really my P0 is figuring out what I've got. software engineering is sort of like a character building video game, right? So you've got all of these people on your group that's traversing through this environment, and everybody's got different skill alignments, and you have to sort of come into a new role and figure out, okay, what are the skill alignments of the people that are in front of me? What am I lacking that I'm going to have to add to this team for us to be successful? And how do I put all of these people in places where they're exercising the things that are their deep skills or their shallower skills that they want to build? So very early in that discovery process still.
Where do you start with something like that, an exercise like that?
I mean, it harkens back to the one-on-ones. It's just a lot of conversations, a lot of me being curious and me watching people as they sort of naturally gravitate to things. Giving space, seeing what kinds of tasks people naturally gravitate to when you let the team self-organize around tasks. My approach to line managing is generally to try to work my way out of a job because I want the team managing itself for the most part. There's higher leverage things that I can be doing besides playing traffic cop for engineering tickets. And I don't even have all of the context that I need to direct the tickets to the right place. So the quicker I can get out of that role and do less of that work and let the team do that themselves, and then I'm just more in a coaching role where I'm helping make those decisions. I'm helping have productive conversations when there's a disagreement. That's more productive use of my time, and it's more productive for the team as well. So trying to get to that spot as quickly as I can.
Yeah, one of the prompts I really like is like what tasks like give you the most enjoyment or the most gratification or most satisfaction? Because I often find there's a gap between what people tell you they want to be working on and what they actually gravitate towards and what actually gives them that gratification at work. Is that kind of a gap that you've seen?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we're most satisfied when we're growing. And a lot of times when you ask somebody what they want to be working on, it's the things that are easy. It's the things that are safe. And yeah, they're good at them, but those things are also boring after a time. You have to be growing some.
Yeah, things that might scare people. Like I think that if someone says, "Oh, like I'm a bit scared of that," like that's actually normally a good thing. It's like that's okay. Like let's take away any barriers that are going to stop you from doing that, make it slightly less scary. But like the fact that it's scary is good.
Right. I mean, it gets into the book, the Tim Harford book, Messy, that I referenced in my talk yesterday. It's when you're in those places that feel a little dangerous, a little unsafe, a little messy, your interest is piqued. You're more attentive. You're more eager to do the work than if you're someplace that's safe.
And like that's it. Like I think that's something that's quite like natural to like operate within a startup environment or a scale-up environment, but like really difficult to bring into a larger organization, but important. Do you think it's an impossible thing to do at a larger organization?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, how to scale up sort of a culture of autonomy in a larger organization. I'm convinced it's an interface problem.
Yeah, we had Rob Zuber, who's the CTO at Circle CI. He's been there for a long time on the podcast, and he used the word scrappy a lot in a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, organizations, when you get to a certain size, you have leadership that wants to exert control over the rest of the organization, understand what everybody's working on, be able to direct the work in the directions they want it to go. And it ends up being very directive because it's much harder to do it in other ways. But I think you have to figure out how to do it in other ways if you want that scrappiness, if you want that entrepreneurship inside the organization.
And then going back to like that kind of P0 for you right now, it's really kind of you're looking at capabilities, you're looking at team structures. Do you bring kind of any, I know some people like archetypes here in engineering. Engineers love archetypes. Yeah. There's also kind of, certain formulaic ways to kind of look at your capabilities, spot gaps and start to do it. Do you like to use frameworks like that, or do you kind of do it more on the fly?
Combination. I tend to find myself thinking in terms of superpowers a lot.
Yeah.
Just because people are very bad at spotting their own superpower.
Yeah.
They don't know things that are naturally easy to them that other people struggle with because it's always been easy.
Yeah.
And it's tempting to write those things off as not being very valuable just because they are so easy. And so helping an engineer go, no, actually that thing that's so easy to you, that's a rare and precious skill. And let me show you how to leverage it even more so you can be more effective on this team. So that's part of it. And then Kevin Goldsmith, 5 or 6 years ago at LeadDev, introduced me to the idea of using a spider chart to chart skills on your team and gaps on your team. So one of the approaches, the more systematic approach that I'll take is sit down and kind of figure out, okay, what are the axes that are important for this team, for the product that we're building? Where does everybody fall on these axes? Okay, now where are my gaps?
Yeah, we use these see-me kind of like, it's a bit like a Myers-Briggs, but a little bit different. Like I'm always interested in the results and also like healthily skeptical of them.
Yeah.
I think you can have good teams of like a lot of one type.
Yeah.
But so kind of really like over-indexing, striving for that balance feels like not a great use of time.
Right.
But what do you think?
I think everything is a tool. And you sort of have to be pragmatic about how you use any of this information that you get. It informs what you're actually seeing on the ground, but it doesn't dictate what you're seeing on the ground. So a lot of it is watching the team function, watching the way they discuss things, watching how they ship software, and then layering on whatever information you get from outside tools, what other perspectives that you've developed about the team, and figure out what the ground truth is.
Yeah. And then how does this become not a P0 for you? Like at what point are you happy that you've kind of figured this part out and can move on, or is it just always going to be there?
No, it does go into the background a little bit. I think it is, what I was saying about getting the team to a place where they're mostly self-managing. Once I've got the team to that point that they all kind of know what they're bringing to the table, where they can apply the most leverage, where they're all taking turns leading in the places that they have deep expertise, and I'm not having to do as much work day to day to kind of make the work flow through, that's when I relax about this a little bit.
And you said you're always looking to kind of work yourself out of a job. Once you work yourself out of this job, what do you think the next thing will be?
Probably hiring another team. There's always some growth to do in a healthy business. If it's not that, it's collaborating with my product partner to understand product needs of the organization and how I can be directing the technical side of the operation, how I can be directing our infrastructure and the tools that we're building on to set us up to where we can fulfill those customer needs that are coming 6 months, a year down the line.
Yeah, and we kind of glossed over the thing that you mentioned earlier about kind of spotting that AI opportunity. I can't remember the way you phrased it, but it kind of touches on this as well, because obviously you want to make sure that your skills mix is kind of ready for that opportunity. But also you have to do that collaboration with product, with the rest of the business to really work out like what's the P0 on that side, like what's the one place where we can bring this new tool to bear in its most impactful way.
Right.
How far down that path are you?
We have a good understanding of the places in our application where we could use a large language model. There's a couple of very obvious applications for us. And so now it's really a matter of how do I make the time in the roadmap for the team to experiment with that? Because that's what it's largely going to be for us is who's curious about this, who wants to dig into it? Great, go take a few Fridays, play with it, come back and show us what you learned. And then when we start getting someplace that's interesting, okay, now what skills do we need to be able to operationalize this? How do we control the costs on this?
And have you found there's any kind of significant blockers with that type of technology that you haven't encountered with other types of technology?
It is a different skill set, and it's, we like to put AI and just call it that, but it's really this bucket of skills that you have to have. So you need somebody that's well-versed in big data because you're going to be feeding a lot of data into the model and you have to store that data somewhere. You have to analyze it. There's a QA component to it that's really important that gets overlooked a lot because once you put everything in an LLM, how do you verify that what's coming out the other side is what you expect most of the time? It's
a very different QA problem to traditional.
Yeah. It's almost more of a fuzzing problem than anything.
Great. And Nick, we always like to finish on a recommendation.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you have seen, read, listened to recently that you want to recommend?
Sticking with the AI theme, I've really been enjoying Perplexity AI lately. More than any other AI tool, just because it'll cite its sources. And I found it's a great way, if it's one of those topics that I don't already have deep expertise in, if I'm kind of on the surface level of knowledge and I just need some guideposts on how to dig into something more deeply, I can ask it a pretty pointed question and it'll give a good summary, but then it'll give 4 or 5 links out to resources that are useful for educating myself on that.
So I've not come across this tool. Is it similar to ChatGPT?
It is, yeah. It's a chat-based interface. Really the only difference is citations.
Okay, great. And that gives you the opportunity to learn more about what you're getting out of that, yeah.
Learn more and verify what it's telling me, if it's hallucinating or not. Because if it only returns one source, it might be hallucinating. But if it's returning 5 or 6 sources, it's probably more authoritative on that particular topic.
Awesome. Love that. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much again for bringing a great talk to LeadDev. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
Thank you again for listening to Priority Zero, a LeadDev podcast. Remember, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, but when you do, please remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we hope to see you at the next one.